Hi everyone, welcome to our weekly lives. So this week it was a little bit more casual. There's so much going on, and of course everyone is reading a lot of other things right now as we sit with waiting for the election results to be counted and feeling stressed about that. So I thought it would be a great time for integration instead of just adding more to our heads. So I opened through the MailChimp email that I send out on Tuesdays in the afternoon or sometimes the evening because, life. And then also on Instagram, I just opened the field for questions about topics we've already discussed where we want more information, more clarity, and then any other topics that have been percolating in your mind and you've wanted to ask questions for. So we're just going to touch on two of them that I got today. We'll start with the first one, and if we have time, we'll move into the second one. So one of the questions I got, which was a really beautiful question, was what is the Ayurvedic perspective on the foods and activities that we engage with in modern life? How does Ayurveda perceive that? And so I think that's a really integrative question, and I'm really happy to take some time to talk about it. It's sort of what we've been leaning toward in a lot of these conversations is a lot of what we're taught in like modern healthy living is actually not necessarily healthy. I also have experienced this feeling that we're just supposed to put up with certain like discomforts as if that is actually balance. So Ayurveda perceives health, swastha, as stability in the self. So if there is a huge physical struggle or emotional struggle, we don't want to just feel like that we have to live like that necessarily. Sometimes things are long-standing and our whole life is about finding ways to work with that imbalance or that struggle, but it's not necessarily like a neutral state. We just can become neutral around it, which sometimes is super supportive and sometimes just means we stuff things that are troubling us under the rug. Mostly I'm speaking to things like constipation, like going to the bathroom every morning, like clockwork without any kind of a stimulus is normal. So anything that moves away from that would be abnormal. And so trying to find a way to create a lifestyle that supports that possibility is really important. So, like using coffee, using stimulants in general, laxatives, etc., to make the bowels come. Sure, you're getting empty, but is the system actually working? So Ayurveda is more about, is the system actually working? And if it's not working, where? And are there things that we can adjust in our lifestyles that can make that less likely to be such a struggle? So that's just the overview, is that most of the time things that are considered healthy, we want to look at with like a side eye, because healthy for who? And like, according to what goals? Because we don't all have the same goals of health. Ayurvedic goals of health are really like to end suffering in the body. That is the goal. There are these 4 arthas. They're called the Purusha arthas, but there are 4 Ayurveda, which if you're from a yogic background, the Purusha arthas from a yogic perspective. So it's Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So like a sense of purpose in the world, goal setting related to the sense of purpose and not distracting from that. Kama, like the pleasure that comes from doing your Dharma, doing the right thing. So pleasure meaning like it might be hard, but it's also really rewarding. And then moksha meaning like self-realization. So that's the yogic process. The Ayurvedic perspective, because it's not concerned with self-realization in that it expects that if your body is not so distracting and if your mind is not so distracting, you'll be more likely to become self-realized. Their Purusha arthas are different. So it's Dharma, same like purpose of life. Artha, goal setting relative to the maintenance of that, like putting that as a priority, so similar or same. Kama, the pleasure that comes from doing the Dharma and following through with these goals, these goals that are for Dharma and not for like any other reason, really. So not about material gain, essentially. And then the final one is Sukha, which means happiness. su meaning beautiful, and ka meaning a space, so like a beautiful or a happy space. So Ayurveda is mostly concerned with like physical contentment so that you can do your dharma, basically. And so anything that distracts away from that would be not healthy. So anytime we're engaging in modern life, if the stuff that we're doing is pulling us away from that or making it more difficult to aim for the dharma or aim for the arthas relative to the dharma, or is making us make other goals because we're sort of suffering physically or psychologically, then that we would want to address the root of those things, and that's what Ayurveda is about. So if we're thinking about food and activities in modern life that we engage with from an Ayurvedic perspective, the first thing to think of is like anytime something is called healthy, we want to say who says, why, and who is this aimed for? What is their artha, and is that your artha? You know? So that's always something to think about. Ayurveda is very much about critical thinking, and so anything that happens in the modern world, if it is absent or requests the absence of critical thinking, Ayurveda already has like red flags waving. So that is the primary thing. In terms of, you know, like the different fad diets, Ayurveda is not really into the fad diets. This is why I was talking about the 6 tastes a couple weeks ago, because basically a healthy meal should consist of all 6 tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, astringent, and pungent. So I'm like, can I get to the 6? Okay, so the 6 tastes should be represented in every single meal, because that's a complete diet. So Ayurveda doesn't engage with calories, doesn't engage with carbs, etc. In Ayurveda, not all carbs are equal, because we know the gunas are present in everything. So just because some of the carbs have similar gunas, not all of them are the same. Red rice is not equal to brown rice, it's not equal to black rice, is not equal to quinoa, is not equal to millet, right? So yeah, there are grains, but they're all different grains, and so the function in the body and who it's useful for is going to be different. And thinking critically about how we eat, so you know, we're trying to go low carb to lose weight, but then if we're eating other foods that are heavy, that are sweet, that are sour, that are salty, then we're just going to gain weight anyway. So Ayurveda, again, is more about critical thinking, and that all the tissues to survive and to be built well and to function well require all 6 tastes, but we can change the proportions of those 6 tastes to balance the primary imbalance doshically. We also can think more critically about the individual tastes, like I was mentioning with the grains, for example, which are sweet taste. We can have grains which would be considered really smooth and heavy, or we can think of grains that make the body lighter, or grains that make the body drier. Like millet, for example, is a grain that when consumed is really hot to the body, so it naturally can be used for weight loss. Or buckwheat is kind of dry, and so it can assist with weight loss, but it doesn't mean we're just not consuming grains, because though temporarily it might make you feel like you're losing mass, you're just losing like good mass. Only eating meat, for example, like if we were going to do paleo, like anytime your diet is cutting out entire food groups, you have a long-term problem. Consuming that much rajasic energy that's also heavy and difficult to digest is going to create excess in the body, even if you're having momentary success. So thinking about things from an Ayurvedic perspective means considering long-term karmas, like meaning long-term results. Or so other examples could be from a modern perspective, like eating late. If we think of Ayurveda has like this rhythmic way of living, then it means that when the sun is setting, we should be doing kind of what the sun is setting. We're trying to align our Agni, our digestive fire, with the sun. And so if we are eating out of step with the sun and or out of step with our own hunger, we're going to cause problems like I described in a couple videos ago, which you can go back and look at about Ama. So eating without hunger and eating before bed or eating before sleeping in general is like an amazing way to invest in your accumulation of Ama, which is like undigested food that kind of rots in your body and then through activity spreads out. Activity could be like a shower, could be sex, could be exercise, could be just sleeping. So it's an excellent way to just kind of make a mess really quickly. In general, eating without hunger and drinking without thirst is an amazing way to create a doshic imbalance. Similarly, the contrast is true. Ignoring urges, suppressing urges is an amazing way to create imbalances in the body, causing ill health. So, ignoring your feeling of hunger, ignoring your feeling of thirst. I know many of the people that I have worked with in the past, we actually end up having to discuss what does hunger feel like, what does thirst feel like, because if we're constantly snacking, so that's another thing that's often promoted in wellness culture is like always snacking to like lose weight. But if your body never gets to experience hunger, it never gets a break. And if we're always eating or we're always suppressing those feelings of hunger or thirst, our body is going to either stop offering them, which doesn't mean that you're not actually hungry. It just means like, oh, the body's like, oh, this person isn't even listening to me. We'll just wait till they're ready, essentially. And then problems mount. So we want to make sure that we are not suppressing urges, even like passing gas, burping, laughing, crying, hunger, thirst. These are all really important things that if you feel the urge for those things, let it out or it creates a lot of problems. So having to urinate, like, one of the things that we talked about in a course I took a couple months ago was like how damaging it is when workplaces force their employees to hold the urge to use the restroom and how damaging that is for the organs of the body. And also it creates a mistrust between your senses and your brain. Your senses no longer are going to trust what your brain is going to interpret. So that is also a problem. So suppressing of any urge and trying to manipulate the urges is always going to be problematic. There are absolutely no shortcuts into Ayurveda. So in Ayurveda, and really there are no shortcuts in health. Doing it the long way usually produces better results because you most likely will only have to do it once. So that is always better, right? Another thing that happens a lot, which we kind of touched on in the sweat conversation, is that over drinking. So a lot of people are told, again, by wellness culture, to drink like gallons of water a day or like always be sipping water. So similarly to always snacking, always like eating something. If you're always drinking water, you're never experiencing thirst. The body doesn't have any time to use the water you're drinking, and the water floods your digestive tract and squishes your agni, right? You're not going to go camping, build a fire, get your food prepared to cook it, and then throw water on top of the fire. That would be a real waste of the fire, right? So before eating or just all day in general, if you're constantly sipping liquids but you aren't experiencing actual thirst, that can become problematic. It builds something called clade, which causes all hosts of problems. Clade in some ways is very similar to ama, and it's kind of the thing that we're trying to remove through sweat. So sweat, as we talked about in the previous lecture, it burns metas dhatu, this fat tissue, and it also burns clade, which is a lot like metas, but not in a supportive way. It has similarities to also, but it's more liquid and it's mobile. So through sweat, we can remove clade, or vyayam, exercise in general, but like a little bit of sweat means that you are starting to burn clade. Doesn't mean we need to sweat all the time to burn clade. It just means that's what we're trying to think about. So Ayurveda doesn't see any shortcuts. So if you're entering a situation where you're moving into a fad diet, or you feel like you're suppressing urges, constantly eating, constantly drinking, never eating, never drinking, Ayurveda would not suggest that you continue on that path, because it will make you have to invest more in your health later. It will be more time consuming and more expensive from the pocketbook perspective also, and a little bit more intense. In terms of eating late or drinking late, so like I had just said, the body is trying to move with the sun and trying to move with the season. So when the sun is highest, this is when it's time to engage in activity because you're supported by Agni, by the sun. And this is also when we can be eating. If there is Agni in the sky, then there's Agni in you, because we are exact reflections of our environment. So that means that as seasons change, your time of eating may have to shift, because we are trying to eat dinner before the sun sets. We want some Agni to assist us, because as we move toward 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., it becomes a time ruled by kapha, ruled by water, which is going to make it really, really hard for you to eat. The 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., 8 p.m. time period is ruled by earth, also a time that's very absent of digestive fire. So it's not an ideal time to eat. So eating earlier, early bird special, is better, because 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m. is a lot closer to 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, when the sun is actually active in the sky, which means the sun is active in your body, which is Tejas or Agni, which means that is present in your body, which means you will be able to break down food. Additionally, if you eat late, like, life happens, you eat late, but then you go to bed an hour or an hour and a half later, when your body lies down, the shrotomukhas, the channels, the valves on the channels close, because your body is supposed to be turning off when you go to sleep. So if your body is trying to physically digest food, and then the valves of all of they're called shrotomukhas, the channel mouths, close, how are you going to digest anything? Where is that food going to go? It's just going to sit. That's why you wake up really feeling lethargic. You wake up still kind of feeling the food in your body. Bowel movements kind of tend to be late after that. Urine can be kind of cloudy or is influenced by the food that you took previously. So it's better to go to bed. Like, if you have to eat late, it's better to eat almost like liquid, like a golden milk or something, so that you get some bruhan, you get some building in your body, but it's not a huge quantity, and it doesn't take a lot of work for your body to break down. The nighttime is really best for like internal work, meaning you don't have to be awake for it. Let your body process everything that you took in from the day, and you'll wake up well rested. The idea is that you don't want like mental heaviness in the morning. And so if you ate late, your body is going to be trying to deal with food all night. You're not going to sleep super well. You will wake up feeling tamasic, super kind of heavy, probably oily, just like that feeling. We want to allow the night to help us digest subtle things like psychology. So it's also important to get a full night's sleep. And to get a full night's sleep and a good full night's sleep, it's better to go to bed before 10 p.m. That might sound like bad news to some of us. So at 10 p.m., the doshic predominance of the time changes to pitta dosha. So water starts to become more like fire. This is why people get a second wind. So you think you're feeling like super creative at midnight or 11, and you may be, but it's also influenced by the tamas guna, the guna of heaviness. So and it's also a guna that kind of tends toward like unseeing well. So how good are your ideas that you come up with in the middle of the night? I gave this example in the teacher training. You end up having like a Jerry Maguire situation where you like quit your job in the middle of the night and you write this like 14-page document, and then you create a mess. Like Jerry Maguire, it worked out, and it'll work out for everyone in the end, but like what kind of mess do you want to make? So that's just a long, awkward example to say that it's really important to make sure that at night you're allowing your body to do subtle processing. Think of night sleep as like a long shavasana. You need to digest all of the time that you are awake, and it's not really your brain's job. It's just your body will take care of it for you. So another thing to consider is that like broken sleep is also a sign of doshic imbalance. So if you're not sleeping through the night, or you wake up in the middle of the night and you have a hard time going back to sleep, or you have a hard time falling asleep, this again is an example of doshic imbalance. You don't need to suck it up. This is something that could be addressed through Ayurveda, because it's seen as a sign of imbalance. So broken sleep, where you like wake up and go back to sleep several times, this is called Kandita Nidra. It's usually ruled by Pitta. So if this is happening to you, you can know this is likely a Pitta imbalance, or at least has something to do with Pitta. and having a hard time falling asleep is usually a sign of vata imbalance. So again, not all issues are ruled by one dosha, but this is generally what you can think of if you're finding this is your reality currently. Because 10 p.m. is ruled by Pitta dosha, and those who suffer from broken sleep, you want to cut out fire engagement late. So that also means like not watching screens before bed, not reading things that are going to cause like tightness in the body or germinate a lot of thoughts, because it will make staying asleep very difficult. Ayurveda is very much working from the principle that like increases like. So through the process of samanya, of similarity, it creates more of the same. So if you know you're suffering from Candida nidra, that's broken sleep, that's usually ruled by Pitta dosha, then you should know that if you're engaging with screens, which are very fiery, right? They're very bright. They contain like literal light. You're going to be putting more Pitta in your body at a time when Pitta is coming higher around 10 p.m., 11 p.m., so you're not really doing yourself a favor. So thinking critically about the activities you do, what they're made of, the gunas, the qualities that these things are made of, and then how it relates to the things you may be circling in your life at the moment. So really good sleep. These are they're called the 3 pillars of life according to Ayurveda. It's ahar, which means what you eat and when you eat it. And it also has to do with nidra, how you're sleeping, and then brahmacharya, which usually means like sexual expression, but it also means like how are you expending your energy. So is too much energy going out? Is not enough energy coming in? What are you doing with your senses? Those 3 things need to be in balance relative to each other. That's another way to measure swastha, health. So if the things that you're doing to be healthy are taking you away from that balance of 3, you're not heading to swastha, even if it's called health, the thing that you're doing. In terms of food, in terms of ahar, we mentioned this with the Amma chapter, so you can go back to the lecture from that day that's on this account. It's also on my website, and then if you want to read more, you can go to the blog, also on my website, and read more about how you get and the details of that. But there are these things called the Virud ahars, means like incompatible foods that whenever they're put together cause ama and cause digestive distress. And that's essentially the entire American diet. So like meat with dairy is a no-no. Fruit with dairy is a no-no. So there goes cheesecake. There goes like hamburgers with cheese on them, a cheeseburger. I can't think of what that's called. There goes salads with fruit on them. There goes those like morning yogurts with fruit inside. All of these things cause ama. They cause digestive distress long term. Milkshakes, anything that's cold should be completely avoided essentially. So no ice in drinks, no ice drinks. Smoothies are super problematic, especially if they're not room temperature. These are all things that Ayurveda would recommend like backing away from. Because remember, there is no quick fix to health. Another thing that is a misunderstanding, her healthy habits likes that. That's her motto. So that's just something also to think about. Additionally, there is like an obsession with salads as a light food. So here's another sad truth. Salads are considered cold. So they do stamban, which means it makes things contract. So you're eating a salad and then it is actually really hard to digest because it's considered cold, and thus is hard to digest in and of itself because it makes the channels of digestion contract. And then on top of this, most green vegetables are not considered light by Ayurveda. They're considered guru, heavy. They're actually heavy to digest. And some of them are actually undigestible raw, like broccoli and cauliflower. Some of you, I'm sure, are already avoiding those things raw because it makes your partners and neighbors frustrated with the sounds that you end up making after. So things need to be, in general, when in doubt, for any dosha, things need to be cooked. you can think about salads when your digestion is strong and when it's not cold outside. So like eating a salad in December, even in like San Luis Obispo, is still not wise, because even though it's not as cold as Colorado, it's still cold for the location. Because remember, Ayurveda is about relativity. There is no vacuum rule, except for what I just told you about Varudahar, like this. So this is something to keep in mind when you're trying to pick your food groups. And you can have a day where you just like go for it, but then pay attention to what happens after. Like go have the burger with the fries and the ketchup and the cheese and the milkshake or the ice cold soda or whatever. Or you can do it the healthier way. So it's like organic beef with like an organic cheese. And maybe you don't have a milkshake, but you have a smoothie or like a raw juice or a beer with ice in it or whatever. You'll still notice something is going to happen. So just taking inventory of the cause and effect relationship of what you consume and how it actually makes you feel, regardless of whether it's considered healthy, is like the key to freedom. Because you won't be controlled by labels anymore. You'll be controlled by your actual experience and this like unwillingness to accept what someone else told you is healthy, like even though I'm now telling you these things, but you should trust me, of course. The other issue with modern life that we want to think about, that all of us already know and that COVID super highlighted, was that there is often way too much output, no time off. So if our Gyan Indriyas and Karma Indriyas, our senses of intake and perception, are overused, underused, or misused, there's going to be mental distress. Mental distress leads to really bad choices, which leads to physical lack of health. So Ayurveda always sees the beginning of suffering as one of the mind, because when the mind is colored by rajas and tamas, by these gunas of intensity or lethargy, essentially, we're going to end up making bad choices because we aren't going to see reality as it actually is. We'll see it through this weird filter. And so the process of yoga and Ayurveda is trying to decrease that filter so that what you see, you can actually trust more likely as reality. And thus you'll generally, feel calmer, feel more swastha, more stable in yourself, and also literally make better choices for food and drink and activity. So we want to make sure that, and now we're all watching this on Instagram, so there's some irony there, but overusing the eyes, looking at screens too much, looking at anything too much is going to be damaging to the eyes. Not using the eyes is going to be damaging to the eyes. Same with the ears, sense of smell, sense of taste. So like your sense of taste should be able to taste all 6 tastes. If we're only eating one taste, that is a misuse of that sense. Right? If we're only eating popcorn, that's a misuse of that sense. So making sure that our senses of intake, these are called the Jnana Indriyas. Jnana means like knowledge or learning or wisdom. So because our senses that bring information in ideally are bringing us good information that we can make good decisions about or from. And then the Karma Indriyas, karma meaning action. Karma Indriyas are about how we express ourselves through the world. And if we're always expressing ourselves in one way, that is a misuse of the other senses or an overuse of that sense. And it's, of course, also an underuse of those senses. If we're using our sense of speech to tell lies, that's also an example of misuse. So we want to make sure that how we're using our senses is very, very thoughtful. This is what yoga is for. Make things conscious. Everything is conscious. Once everything is conscious, you become more sattvic, more neutral. Neutral meaning like you see things as they actually are, and then the choices you make can be based from a balanced place, as opposed to a place of fear, which is rajas, or lack, which is rajas, or like attachment, which is tamas. This puts us in this place that the Bhagavad Gita talks about, that the Yoga Sutras talk about, that the Hatha Yoga Pradipika also talks about. We talk about this in yoga all the time. Like that rag and dvesh, this rag meaning desire and dvesh meaning aversion, they always come in a package. So the wanting of something means the not wanting of something else. And so the process of yoga is to first recognize those things are happening and then decide if they're actually moving us toward the artha of the goal of our dharma, of what the hell we're doing here on this planet, and how are we going to make a difference in a positive way that doesn't just affect us. So Ayurveda is very much about making sure that we're not overusing our senses, including the sense of thinking, etc., because we want to make sure that we have a balanced proportion of energy coming in, making sure that we can digest what we bring in, and then a response that's also conscious and thoughtful going out and not automatic. Because anything that's automatic ends up having its own rhythm that's run by itself that doesn't require awareness, the buddhi, to help. And so it tends to create patterns that we don't even know when they're not working anymore. You know, sometimes I talk to clients and they'll say things like, I don't know, I've just been doing this my whole life. So that's an example of something that may have worked at one point but doesn't work anymore, or maybe never worked. And we want to be a little bit more aware of what we're doing so that we can have a clearer feedback with how our actions are being received by others and ourselves, so that we can have an active give and take with choices and choice making. So overuse and misuse of the senses is an excellent way to cause damage to the entire body, because it covers the mind with this filter, and then that changes behavior. And then the mind is less perceptive to notice those changes, so there's this snowball effect. And this is why it's really important not to suppress urges, because usually we're suppressing urges or not even aware we're having them because of rajas and tamas. And then that leads to actual physical problems, like not peeing when you have to pee, not going to the bathroom, passing stool when you have to do so, not burping, not passing gas. These are all going to have a backfire. And so recognizing when we're having those needs and then actually taking care of them is another way to clean up the mind and make it more sattvic. That is kind of an overview of modern life. So making sure that things are done. I mean, we all hear this all the time, but it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. Moderation, and making sure that what you are doing, what you are eating, what you are drinking, how you are working is like extremely specific to you, and you know exactly why. And you're also not attached to it, so that if it has to change because you get feedback that's not working, or it was working but it no longer is working, you're willing and able to do that. Does anyone have any other questions that are coming up from this chat? Okay, so next week we will go into dosha, why we are not a dosha, what even is a dosha, and that's a long one. So I'll make sure to write a blog post about that. If you're not on the email listserv, you get that email prior to this conversation so that you can read up in advance. This will also help with questions as they come up. Tomorrow this will be up on Instagram, on both of the sites, and on my website. If you have any questions or have personal questions, please send me a direct message. I would love to talk with you further.